and following the UN Security Council's resolution to call for an immediate ceasefire, what steps will the UK government be doing to ensure that that is implemented in terms of using economic and diplomatic levers? Prime Minister, does everything we can include looking at the situation of UK arms export licences? So when we look at the situation in Gaza, with more than 30,000 individuals being killed, 74,000 wounded, and when we look at children specifically, 13,000 children have been killed and 17,000 have been orphaned, is that something that is taken into account when looking at the UK arms licences? And aid is particularly short of supply in northern Gaza, which is having real issues in terms of getting supplies there. We have documented cases now of babies being born but mothers being too weak to feed them, that they're dying of starvation in the first few hours of life. Is this collective punishment of people?
And now we're moving into the global issues section of our session with Kat Smith from the Petitions Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Some of the most popular e-petitions on the government website at the moment regard the situation in Israel and Gaza. And following the UN Security Council's resolution to call for an immediate ceasefire, what steps will the UK government be doing to ensure that that is implemented in terms of using economic and diplomatic levers?
Yes, well, we were pleased to support the resolution at the UN because it was consistent with our position, which is for an immediate sustained humanitarian pause, which would allow for the safe release of hostages, more aid into Gaza, and provide the, a platform for a more lasting, durable ceasefire. We will continue to do everything we can, both ask Israel at all levels to comply with international humanitarian law, to improve the provision of humanitarian aid into Gaza, but also continue to call on Hamas and work with countries like Egypt and Qatar to unconditionally release the hostages.
Prime Minister, does everything we can include looking at the situation of UK arms export licences?
We have a very robust regime in place for export licences. There's a strategic export licensing criteria. We don't grant export licences where there's a clear risk that the items may be used to commit a serious violation of IHL, and that has been a long-standing case.
And is that constantly under review?
Yes, I've made that point clear from the dispatch box previously.
So when we look at the situation in Gaza, with more than 30,000 individuals being killed, 74,000 wounded, and when we look at children specifically, 13,000 children have been killed and 17,000 have been orphaned, is that something that is taken into account when looking at the UK arms licences?
Yes, I mean, you wouldn't expect me to comment in detail on legal assessments, but you can expect that all the things that you talked about will be things that we, regardless of the export license criteria, are things that are concerning. And I've repeatedly said this humanitarian situation in Gaza is awful, and it's right that we do absolutely everything we can to alleviate the suffering of people. I'm pleased that actually just yesterday the Royal Air Force airdropped for the first time 10 tons of food supplies into Gaza, working together with the Jordanians. That has brought water, rice, cooking oil, flour, canned goods, baby formula along the coastline. We've been working on that for a while. I talked about it at the dispatch box earlier. We want to get aid in through every route we can, land, air and sea. We've obviously done a lot by land. This is the first significant drop that we've done by air, which has been welcomed. And we are working with partners to improve aid access via the maritime corridor as well, and hopefully we'll have more to say on that in the coming days and weeks. But I don't disagree. The humanitarian situation is awful, and I'm proud that we are doing everything we can to alleviate as much of that suffering as we can.
So airdrops are the least effective way of delivering aid to any environment, and is often seen as being the last resort by aid agencies. The most effective route is obviously by land crossings. And what representations are you making, Prime Minister, to the Israeli government to open the Rafah crossing?
Yes, I agree with that. Of course we agree with that. What we need is many more trucks per day. I mean, pre-October 7th there were 400 or 500 trucks a day going in. That's what's necessary, and now there are not that many. It's a fraction fewer, 100 to 200. That's not good enough. I've made that point repeatedly to Prime Minister Netanyahu, as have our allies, and we will continue to press for more land access. That is the best way to get more aid in quickly. But whilst that is not happening at the scale we would like it. I do think it is right to do extra aid via other corridors. As I said, those airdrops will still help, and the maritime corridor, when we get it up and running, will also help. But you're right, the priority is to remove all the barriers to more land aid getting in to Gaza.
And aid is particularly short supply in northern Gaza, which is having real issues in terms of getting supplies there. We have documented cases now of babies being born but mothers being too weak to feed them, that they're dying of starvation in the first few hours of life. Is this collective punishment of people? Yeah,
as I said, we would always and have consistently called on Israel to comply with all its obligations under international humanitarian law. We've already tripled the aid or the humanitarian support that we are putting into the region, and as they're doing it by every potential corridor. We are also putting, I've raised personally with Prime Minister Netanyahu the opportunity to bring more aid in from the north through Ashdod port and then through the northern crossing at Kerem Shalom. That is something together with allies we've continued to raise, because that would open up more access into the north of Gaza as well.
Mm-hmm.
And something that we've also talked about with the Jordanians, and again, I've discussed that with the King of Jordan himself, because if we can get aid in through the top, as I said, via Kerem Shalom, Ashdod, that will be helpful too.
And getting aid in is only one part of the solution here. It's also about the distribution of aid, and airdrops are often seen as being increasingly a survival of the fittest in terms of who's going to access that aid. UNRWA are absolutely unmatched in their administrative ability to distribute aid, have an incredible track record on this. It's now been 2 months since the UK suspended support for UNRWA. At the time, the Secretary of State said in the House of Commons chamber that he expected a decision to be made within 2 months. Given it's been 2 months, do you have an update?
Yes, I think the first thing to say is we're absolutely appalled by the allegations of UNRWA staff being involved in the 7th of October attack. We are committed to getting aid into Gaza. Our decision to pause funding to UNRWA hasn't had any impact on our overall contribution to the humanitarian response. It's important that people know that. So the UN's Office of Internal Oversight and also Catherine Colonna have now provided their interim reports to the UN Secretary General. We want to hear from UNRWA detailed undertakings about the changes in personnel and policy, and we're talking consistently to allies about how to conclude all of that, because I don't disagree, UNRWA properly functioning does have a vital role to play in providing aid and services in Gaza, but it is right that we now reflect on the reports on governance that have been provided and work that through with allies, and that's what we're doing. And our position is consistent with, as I said, many of our closest allies.
And will the decision be in days or months? Just finally, are we expecting a decision in days or months?
I wouldn't like to speculate. Hopefully not. We're all keen to get more aid in as quickly as possible, and that's what we're doing. But given the appalling allegations, it's right that those are addressed seriously.
A very brief follow-on on Gaza from Stephen Crowell.
Thank you, Chair. How is Prime Minister, how is a ceasefire resolution that contains not a word of condemnation of Hamas or any conditionality around hostage release consistent with our previous position and the language you've previously used about Hamas being evil and needing to see them militarily defeated?
Yes, I can appreciate concern on that point. I can very much appreciate that. And as I said, it is close to our position. It's not a perfect replication of it, on Hamas in particular. And I think, as you know, I've been unequivocal and consistent in condemning Hamas, and we will always do that. On hostages, though, the way that I read the resolution and the way I think it should be read is that it does recall that the taking of hostages is obviously prohibited under international law, and it also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and that was important. This is not an unconditional ceasefire. This is a temporary pause, which is consistent with our position, alongside the, as I said, in the words of the resolution, immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and as well as ensuring that more humanitarian access and aid can flow in. That has been, I think you'd agree, my consistent position on this, and that's why I felt that the wording, and the Foreign Secretary felt that the wording was, that whilst not perfect, close enough to our position that we should support it. I'm disappointed to see some reporting last night that Hamas already saying that they're not engaging in conversations around hostage release, which tells you what the problem is. That it can't be right for hostages.
There's no incentive for them.
It can't be right for hostages to be held like that, and it is reasonable for Israel to want to ensure its security and the safe return of its citizens, which is why we've always said this immediate temporary humanitarian pause needs to be accompanied by the unconditional release of the hostages so that we can then get more aid in. And unfortunately, Hamas have not complied with that, and they're the ones that are responsible, and we should never lose sight of that.